You're listening to Real Life, No Filter, where raw emotions and real moments take center stage. No masks, no filters. Just honest stories about life, love, and everything in between. Get comfortable. We're about to begin. The air carried that elusive scent, typically associated with luxury. It was simultaneously light, proud, and utterly weightless. This captivating fragrance was an expert blend of warm, woody notes, sweet vanilla, and delicate hints of exotic flowers. Recreating such an aroma at home seemed impossible. This is how it smells in exquisite hotels, expensive restaurants, or exclusive boutiques. I could stay here forever, in this armchair, Maisie said dreamily, watching the bubbles dance in her champagne glass. In moments like these, you really believe the world revolves around you. I don't know about the whole world, but this consultant is certainly trying. Lila nodded towards the shop assistant. Meanwhile, the assistant approached the friends, carrying several dresses. I'm going to try them on. Maisie placed her glass of unfinished champagne on the small table and headed towards the fitting room. The attentive assistant obligingly held the hem of her own skirt, eager to please in every way. When is the celebration? Lila asked, crossing one leg over the other. In just a couple of days, came a voice from behind the curtain. One of Robert's friends proposed to his girlfriend, and they decided to make it official. You know, American style. There'll be a cocktail party, fireworks, musicians. He's rented a gorgeous country villa with a pool and garden specifically for it. Basically, I want to look flawless next to Robert there. I wish I lived like that, Lila sighed, finishing her champagne. If they spent this much on the engagement, I can imagine what the wedding itself will be like. Maisie slid the curtain open with a jingle and stepped out of the fitting room in a shimmering sequined dress with an open back. The consultant immediately began praising the client's choice. Lila critically examined her friend and frowned. There were still plenty of other outfits hanging on the rack. There was absolutely no need to rush. After a couple more glasses of champagne, the friends finally left the shopping centre with their purchases and headed towards the parking lot to wait for a taxi. Maisie had married a promising man about 6 months ago. Robert held the position of director at a large car dealership. Maisie openly told her friends how she had won back her husband from a grey mouse, a nurse. As soon as their relationship became official, she quit her job and began making plans for a small business of her own. She felt no remorse for her actions. It seemed to her that she had simply taken from a slob what had, by some ridiculous chance, ended up near him. Lila listened, but was in no hurry to repeat Maisie's feats. She believed in karma and preferred to achieve everything herself. Now we're going for shoes. That's at a different boutique. I called them. They promised to set them aside until I arrive. So we need to... Maisie's suddenly animated speech broke off. What do we need to? Lila looked up at her friend and only now noticed that she had frozen, staring somewhere towards the parking lot. Lila turned her head. Next to a luxurious black car, a driver in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers was helping a short woman in a light dress put her purchases into the trunk. Then he opened the back passenger door for a clearly wealthy lady. Maisie, why are you frozen? Lila waved a hand in front of her friend's face. Oh! Maisie flinched, squeezed her eyes shut. Lila, either there's something wrong with my eyesight, or I'm going crazy, she finally said. But I think Robert's ex-wife just got into that car. No way, that can't be. I'd recognize her right away, Lila objected. It's her, just with a new hairstyle and in a dress that costs as much as her monthly salary. Oh, right. And with a personal driver? Lila chuckled. No, Maisie. It's probably just a similar woman. Who would hire such a motorcade for a nurse from a communal apartment? Maisie understood her friend's logic, but the image she had seen a couple of minutes ago wouldn't leave her mind. Could Robert have been so mistaken? Could his ex-wife have transformed into an elegant lady driving around in expensive cars with a personal chauffeur? Well, shall we go? The taxi has arrived? Lila asked, nodding towards it. Uh-huh, her friend replied distractedly. Robert surveyed his office. Everything was impeccable, every item in its place. The monthly sales plan was exceeded, a bonus guaranteed. The new manager, Ethan, had successfully integrated into the team. The contract for the supply of new cars was signed. Complete order. On days like these, Robert was in excellent spirits. He descended from the second floor, where his office with huge windows was located, to the first and watched the young employees bustling about, trying to please clients. He immediately asked a young employee to bring him coffee and took her place, sprawling languidly in an armchair and surveying his domain. Robert had held the position of car dealership director for about 10 months. He himself had started here as a complete novice years ago, but in just 4 years, he had managed to climb to the very top. The sliding doors of the showroom opened silently, and a visitor entered. Robert saw that the new manager immediately headed towards him. Over his years in sales, Robert had developed a knack for identifying serious clients from those who had come just to browse or annoy. This type, however, repelled him. Disheveled hair, wrinkled jeans, carelessly rolled up sleeves of a plain shirt, dirty sneakers. Ethan offered the man a catalogue, but the man clearly stumped the young employee. Robert clicked his tongue in annoyance and decided to take matters into his own hands. Ethan, handle something else for now. I'll take care of this. Approaching, he gestured the newcomer away, temporarily assuming his duties. What are you interested in? Hello, the visitor greeted Robert. I'd like to surprise my wife for her birthday, but I don't see the car of the right color here. He stated the model name and scanned the showroom. Robert recalled that a car of that shade only came in the top trim level and cost significantly more. Such models were delivered only by special order. Unfortunately, we don't have it in stock, but we can place an order. With a 30% deposit, it takes about 3 weeks. The director squinted, evaluating the visitor again. 3 weeks is a long time. If I pay the full amount up front, will the term be shorter? Robert was astonished, but maintained a composed demeanor. Yes, of course, but in that case, full prepayment will be required. He feigned a courteous smile. Then delivery will only take 5 days. Let's draw up the contract. Robert nodded, and Ethan immediately handed him a form with papers. The director passed the contract to the visitor. He quickly scanned the text, turned the page, then clarified. Do I understand correctly that in case any defects are found at the time of transfer, your company bears no responsibility for this? Precisely so. This is a condition for expedited delivery of the goods, Robert confirmed. So you're offering me to buy sight unseen? The client snapped the contract shut, shook his head disapprovingly, and returned the papers to the man standing before him. Thank you, but I think I'll look for a car for my wife somewhere else. Goodbye. The visitor turned and headed for the exit. Robert rolled his eyes and, assuming he wasn't heard, muttered, "Country bumpkins, coming here from their villages." For a moment, the man paused in the doorway, but then he exited the car dealership. Remember this, Ethan. Robert shoved the unnecessary contract into the manager's hands. Don't waste a minute on clients like this. They haven't got a penny to their name, but their ambitions are sky high. And call the cleaner, have her wipe the floor where he walked. That same evening, Robert picked up Maisie. She and Lila had spent the day in pleasant errands, preparing for the upcoming event. They talked to their heart's content, laughed, and made quite a few purchases. One of the couple's favourite topics of discussion was mutual acquaintances. "I could swear on my new shoes that I saw your ex today," Maisie stated firmly. Robert listened with mild curiosity, but grimaced and waved it off. What kind of money could she possibly have for boutiques and expensive taxis? "Don't make me laugh. I won the apartment in court. She certainly won't reach the level of chief physician. She has nothing left but a room in a communal apartment and old things." "What if she inherited something?" Maisie suggested. "Did you see them in Dunino? Her parents live in a modest one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts. Her grandma signed over her room to her when she was young. Her relatives don't really keep in touch with her. So it definitely wasn't Alice. Get it out of your head." Maisie leaned back in her seat with relief. Her husband's assurances calmed her down. The thought that someone she considered a nobody could afford shopping in expensive stores deeply bothered her. "No, that's impossible." "Robert, how on earth did you ever get involved with her? Were there really no decent women around?" Maisie giggled. "I was young and inexperienced," Robert echoed the tone. "I wasn't good at judging people." He took Maisie's hand and gently kissed her fingers. "Anyway, I'm sure I just imagined it in the parking lot today," Maisie concluded. "How was your day?" she asked, snuggling up to him. "After lunch, some type dropped by the dealership. Messy and empty," Robert began. Often, fate brings together people who, it would seem, are completely unsuited for each other. From the outside, it's obvious. But for the participants themselves, caught up in their feelings, it's difficult to notice how different their views on life are, how often disagreements arise, and how gradually the once loved person sinks lower and lower on the list of priorities. Alice and Robert met at the wedding of mutual acquaintances. The 29-year-old nurse immediately noticed the groom's 30-year-old friend. They danced a lot, chatted animatedly, had drinks, and didn't part all evening. And then they left the celebration together. Both were single, had a little too much to drink, and gave in to the moment. A month later, Alice found out she was expecting a child. This news was a complete surprise to Robert. At the time, he was working as a salesman in a small bike shop and had absolutely no plans for children. But a sense of duty prevailed, and he proposed to Alice. The wedding was modest and rushed, without much preparation. But the parents on both sides gave the young couple a gift, and that money was almost enough to buy a spacious two-bedroom apartment. They took out a mortgage for the missing amount, but it seemed like a trifle. As before that, they had no home of their own. Robert rented a small apartment. Alice lived in a room in a communal apartment inherited from her grandmother. In short, they lived quite modestly. It was difficult for both of them to get used to married life after many years of being single. But Alice was genuinely in love with Robert and was ready to forgive him his sharpness, hurtful words, and broken promises. However, fate had other plans. In the 4th month of her pregnancy, Alice lost the baby. Her life was saved. She spent about a week in the hospital, but the cause of the tragedy remained unclear. Alice, who desperately wanted to be a mother, took the loss hard, crying into her hospital pillow at night. Robert, on the other hand, didn't seem particularly upset, but rather relieved. His thoughts were occupied with other things. "We'll have children later," Alice said, as she and her husband sat down for dinner. "My dear, what children now?" You almost died last time, and you want to repeat that? Robert busily wielded his fork, not looking at his wife. Let's live for ourselves first. Get on our feet. You need to have a checkup. Alice sadly agreed. She decided to follow her husband's advice. After all, he was right. You shouldn't rush headlong into things. You need to calm down. 2 years passed like this. Robert was content. He had a wife who worked and didn't cause problems, and he could fully concentrate on his career. Visiting car dealerships, he realized that the buyers there were wealthy people, which meant earnings could be much higher. He needed to give it his all, and Robert tried his best. First, he became a senior manager, then deputy director. By this time, he had already started looking at Alice with irritation. At home, only a boring apartment awaited him. Alice hadn't changed her hairstyle once in 5 years. She talked only about her work at the hospital and her desire to have children. She had been going to doctors for years, and in public healthcare, even with connections, things moved slowly. He was tired of it. In the evenings, he avoided intimacy with his wife. Meanwhile, Robert's income grew significantly. He bought himself an expensive car, started wearing expensive suits and the latest gadgets. He quickly paid off the mortgage on the apartment. He also noticed that women were paying him increased attention. Against the backdrop of his growing success and self-confidence, his wife, with her perpetual sadness and complaints, seemed completely out of place. Soon, Robert began an affair with Maisie, an attractive employee from a neighboring insurance company office. He didn't particularly hide their relationship, which quickly became serious. Maisie wasn't bothered by his married status. She saw the contempt with which he spoke of his wife and had seen her photos on social media herself. Boring, in a simple sweater, with a perpetual bun and a plump face. Unattractive and dreary. There was no need to specifically file for divorce. As soon as Robert learned that he was being offered the position of car dealership director, he decided that Alice, with her endless complaints and gloom, was a thing of the past. He filed for divorce himself. His stunned wife looked at him with tear-filled eyes, not understanding. "Robert, why? Why are you doing this to me?" "What? Getting revenge? You're just a mistake, a grey mouse. What can you give me? Nothing. You can't give birth. You can't create a normal family. And you yourself are like a grey moth. Disgusting. Find someone on your level. I don't need a wife like that. And don't try to explain anything." Robert started packing his suitcases. Alice cried quietly while he rushed around the apartment. She couldn't believe what was happening until the very end. The realization came when her ex-husband ruthlessly won the apartment in court and told her to gather the remnants of her belongings from the half-empty, once-loved apartment and return to her grandmother's room in the communal apartment. Her parents didn't have enough space even without her. So, in just a couple of weeks, from a married woman, Alice turned into a lonely, abandoned resident of a communal apartment. "Well, we're back," she said, standing at the door of her room, holding a suitcase in one hand and a cat carrier in the other. "Everything's like before." Felix the cat rubbed affectionately against the bars of the carrier, showing that the main thing for him was to be with his mistress, no matter where. Entering the familiar space, Alice felt as if those years of marriage, the loss of her child, the divorce, and the pain caused by Robert had never happened. Her beloved lilac curtains still hung on the window, and the spout of her grandmother's teapot peeked out from the cupboard. Alice sat down on the sofa, leaned back, and closed her eyes, trying to understand her feelings. She needed to find the strength to start all over again. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but giving up and drowning in self-pity wasn't in her nature. Life began anew, and how dearly Alice would have paid to chirp as carefree as the sparrows outside the window. But instead, old grievances made themselves known, flaring up in painful bursts. She thought, trying to understand why it had happened. Her mother fueled the painful thoughts. You had a normal husband, he didn't drink, didn't run around, and you got divorced. Why? How should I know, Mom? Alice replied wearily. You should have stood your ground. You should have shown some character and gone back to court. Mum, stop. Alice covered her ears, like she did as a child. I barely have the strength to get up for work in the morning, and I simply don't have any for court, or money for a lawyer. This conversation repeated itself again and again. First, her mother pitied her. Then she began to reproach her. This pattern was terribly tiresome. Work became Alice's only solace. She had worked as a nurse in a children's clinic for many years and genuinely loved her profession. She dreamed of enrolling in residency, but couldn't save up for the tuition. 3 weeks had passed since she moved back. It felt strange to return to a small room after a spacious apartment. But instead of a perpetually dissatisfied husband, she was greeted by Felix the cat with joyful meows. And gradually, her heart felt lighter. The evening sunbeams softly lay on the walls, casting long shadows, painting the windows golden. Alice remembered one evening. She was returning home after work, having stayed late with reports. Deciding to take a walk to clear her head, she found that the path led past the car dealership where her ex-husband worked. To avoid remembering the past and spoiling her mood, Alice turned in another direction, farther away. The road became longer, but calmer. Usually she enjoyed walking, looking at passing cars, shop windows, clouds, birds on wires, dogs dozing in the shade. And this time, Alice walked, watching carefully around her, moving forward step by step. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to something that stood out from the evening calm. A car was parked with its door ajar. It was surprising that no one else had noticed it. Without a second's thought, the woman rushed to the car and threw the door open. A man lay unconscious in the driver's seat. He was about 40, well-built, in a shirt, jeans, with a short, neat haircut. Traces of blood were visible on his shirt. "Do you need help?" Alice asked. Instead of answering, the man slowly opened his eyes and began searching for something on the seat with a trembling hand. He pulled out an inhaler. Alice immediately understood. It was an asthma attack. She quickly unbuttoned the collar of his shirt to free his chest. The inhaler made an empty puff when pressed. "It's empty," Alice cried out in panic. "I'll get a new one right now. Just hold on, please. Calm down. Breathe through your nose." The man, leaning on the steering wheel, nodded. Alice dashed across the road, ignoring the honking cars, curses, and beeps. In an adrenaline rush, she didn't even look at the traffic light. The pharmacy was nearby, around the corner, a few minutes' walk away. She burst in, dishevelled, with eyes full of anxiety. "Inhaler, quickly! Someone is unwell!" she shouted, seeing the pharmacist behind the glass. 30 seconds later, the payment went through, and Alice rushed back to the parking lot. Fortunately, the man's condition hadn't worsened. He was conscious. Right before Alice's eyes, the attack began to recede. "I don't even know how to thank you," the man said, when his breathing returned to normal and his cheeks regained colour. "I thought that was the end." "You mustn't be so careless with your health," Alice said with concern. "An asthma attack can be fatal. You should always have a spare inhaler and keep it handy. You scared me very much." "With my workload, I sometimes forget to even eat, let alone buy an inhaler." The stranger smiled awkwardly. But you're right. You don't joke with things like that. He paused for a moment, looking somewhere at the dashboard. Allow me to drive you home. It's already dark. You shouldn't walk alone at this time, he offered. Alice looked him over carefully. Are you sure you're feeling well? Driving? She looked at him from head to toe, fearing another attack. Don't worry, I'm perfectly fine and quite capable of driving. The car owner smiled. Perhaps I will accept. Alice sighed and nodded. Just, please, not too fast. The car pulled onto the road. Alice suddenly understood why she had agreed. She didn't feel well herself. Suddenly, the man slapped his forehead, so sharply that the woman flinched. How could I? You saved me, and I didn't even ask your name. The driver turned to her. What a gentleman. Alice smiled and introduced herself. Very nice to meet you. I'm Caleb. He introduced himself in return. Are you a doctor? A nurse, Alice clarified. I was just heading home after my shift when I saw you. The conversation flowed easily and naturally, about work, about the beginning of summer, about miraculous rescues. Unnoticed, the car pulled up to the entrance of the courtyard where Alice lived. Thank you very much for your help. She nodded gratefully, getting out of the car. I should be thanking you. Caleb reached into the glove compartment. Take this. If you need anything, call. I'm always ready to help. He handed her a business card. And you? Please take care of yourself. He gently adjusted a strand of her hair. What if I'm not around next time? Instead of answering, Caleb winked at her and nodded, indicating that she understood the hint. Only when the car disappeared from view in the light of the street lamp did Alice look at the business card. It read, Caleb William Rybakoff, owner of a large agricultural machinery manufacturing company. Maisie woke up closer to noon. Her head was still throbbing from the champagne the night before. Bags of purchases were piled on the chair. Robert had left early. His side of the bed was cold. She needed to pull herself together, get ready, and book an appointment at the salon in the evening to trim her ends and refresh her hair colour. She planned to shine at her husband's acquaintance's upcoming engagement party. Half an hour later, after 2 hangover pills, the headache was gone. Maisie was already sitting on a high stool at the kitchen counter, drinking coffee and waiting for the sheet mask on her face to work. I should probably look up who this friend of Robert's is and what the occasion for such a party is, she muttered, clicking the mouse. A couple of clicks, and the page of a certain Michael Brooks opened before her. Studying the information, Maisie understood that he and Robert had known each other since their student days, and after Michael bought a car at Robert's dealership, their communication resumed. Michael turned out to have his own PR agency, as evidenced by the photos in the business album. Maisie scrolled further down the page and saw a photo of the young businessman's fiancée. Olivia, seems all right, pretty, she noted to herself, examining the petite blonde. Must remember that, so I can pretend I'm in the know later. The cursor moved on, scrolling through new virtual frames. And then she saw something she hadn't expected at all. In one of the photos, clearly taken in an expensive establishment, were Michael with his fiancée, some older man, and Robert's ex-wife. Maisie first peered closely, then squeezed her eyes shut, shook her head vigorously, and looked at the screen again. Nothing had changed. The photo was clear, and Alice looked happy and attractive in it. Maisie thought it was an old shot, taken before her wedding to Robert. But the publication date left no doubt. 7 months ago. No, this is impossible, the woman exclaimed into the empty apartment. It just can't be. For about 10 minutes, Maisie sat in a daze. She would look at the photo, then look away. Her experienced eye assessed Alice's dress, jewelry, hairstyle, and makeup. It was clear that a poor nurse could not afford this. Maisie tried to find information about the man who was gently hugging Alice in the photo, but he wasn't tagged, and Maisie couldn't find anyone similar among Michael's friends. She was consumed by curiosity and anger. First, she grabbed her phone and was about to call Robert, but stopped herself in time. Her emotional outburst was unlikely to please her husband. Robert didn't like to remember his ex-wife and the past, especially now that he held a high position. But Maisie couldn't calm down. Her vanity was wounded. It wasn't that she cared that she had taken someone else's husband, but the thought that she might look worse than someone she considered a nobody, a former insurance worker, was unbearable. In the clinic corridor, a small ginger boy sat on his grandmother's lap and listened as she quietly read him a fairy tale from a bright book. This touching scene unfolded in the midst of a regular appointment. While other children in the waiting room fussed, the grandmother and grandson sat in a corner on a worn couch, immersed in their cozy world. "Alice, where are you?" a voice called from behind. Lost in thought, the woman shook off her slight reverie. "Are you okay?" asked her colleague Tia, looking into her eyes. "Yes, I'm fine, sorry." Alice finally shook off her dreamy mood. "Did you need something?" "Yes." Tia nodded impatiently. "My husband's calling. We're booking urgent tickets. Can't wait. And Mrs. Eleanor desperately needs a patient chart. I can't find it anywhere. The reception said some shelves weren't unpacked after the rearrangement, and they're in the storage room downstairs, near the trauma center. Do me a favor, Allie. Help me out. Please find that wretched chart for Mrs. Eleanor." Tia shoved a paper with a name into her hand and made a pleading face. "Okay, but you owe me candy afterwards," Alice agreed with a smile. "I'm on my break anyway." Tia beamed and hurried away, still talking on the phone. Alice decided not to go to the reception desk and headed straight to the storage room to find the medical chart. The trauma center was on the first floor, but had a separate entrance. Alice quickly went around the building and found herself at the entrance to the trauma center, where on one side was the reception room, and on the other, the X-ray. There were a few people in the corridor waiting to be seen. A high school boy with a cast on his arm, a man in his 40s pressing ice to his palm. Alice had already walked past and reached out for the storage room door when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Dennis, your hand is completely white. Take the ice off, or the doctor will think you have frostbite, not a fracture." The woman turned around and met the man's gaze. "Alice! Unbelievable, is that you?" Caleb rose from his chair with joy. "I never expected to see you here. The world really is small." Alice laughed. "How did you end up here? I hope not because of the inhaler." Her heart felt warm and joyful. The previous meeting with Caleb had left a very good impression. It was as if she had met someone she had known and cared for a long time. "No, not at all. My son was waving his hands around during football yesterday and managed to, seems like, break his fingers on the iron goal." Caleb gently stroked the boy with the ice pack. "First, we went to the private clinic where we always get school certificates, but the X-ray machine there broke down. They sent us here. So, here we are, waiting." "Oh, I hope he gets better soon." Alice smiled at the boy. "Why are you waiting? I can ask if you can be seen out of turn." "No, thank you. We'll wait." Caleb stopped her. "You've already helped me so much. Denny's a good boy. He'll bear it. He's a big boy now." He looked at his son, and the boy puffed out his cheeks in response. Alice smiled. It was nice to see you, but work is waiting. She shrugged apologetically. She was about to leave when Caleb called out to her. Alice, would you mind? I'd like to invite you to dinner tomorrow, the man said a little hesitantly. Alice felt her cheeks flush. Okay, she tried to sound calm. When and where? 7 in the evening. I suggest we meet at the entrance to North Park, and we'll decide from there, Caleb replied. All right, see you tomorrow then? Alice awkwardly extended her hand for a farewell handshake. See you tomorrow? Caleb shook her hand, also a little awkwardly, but very gently. The patient chart was found quite quickly. Alice tried to concentrate on work, but inside, everything was rejoicing. She wasn't building castles in the air, but she understood that the dinner invitation wasn't just politeness. Caleb liked her, and she liked him too. Coming out of the storage room about 15 minutes later, Alice saw that Caleb and his son were still sitting in the corridor. She lowered her eyes and quietly slipped into the trauma surgeon's office. Leo Vincent, Alice addressed the elderly doctor. There's a boy in the corridor. Seems like he has broken fingers. A friend's son. Please, would you see him properly? I'll make it worth your while, I won't forget. Ali, why didn't you say so right away? The doctor looked up from his papers and gestured. Of course, we'll do it. Let them come in. Alice went out and nodded to Caleb and Denny, pointing to the office door. He gave her a grateful look and hurried with Dennis to the doctor. What a wonderful day, Alice whispered to herself when she was outside again. It seemed to her that the sun was brighter, the flowers in the hospital flower bed were more lush, and the air was filled with the scent of hope and anticipation. That summer evening on the restaurant terrace by the pond, Alice learned that this polite man was a 30-year-old widower raising a son on his own. Alice was shy about asking her new acquaintance about his affairs, and Caleb didn't immediately tell her that he owned a large agricultural machinery manufacturing company. Although she understood that he wasn't an ordinary person, she didn't fully grasp the scale of his business. But that wasn't the main thing, because next to him, she felt light and happy, as if she were fluttering. Denny was wary at first, but once he got used to Alice, she felt her long-held dream of having children had unexpectedly come true. She enjoyed walking with the boy, holding his hand, buying him treats, praising him, or telling him stories. Caleb just watched them with a quiet smile, happy to see how well the most important people in his life got along. 4 months passed unnoticed like this. Despite Caleb's persuasion, Alice was in no hurry to move into his luxurious apartment, although she often stayed at his place. Caleb showered her with gifts and flowers, but after her past experience, Alice subconsciously feared losing her independence and personal space again. However, when Caleb proposed to her at the restaurant, right at his cousin's party, Alice couldn't resist. With tears of joy in her eyes, she said, yes. There were many congratulations and photos for memory, but nothing could compare to the radiance in the happy woman's eyes. How can I let go of the one who saved my life and stole my heart? Caleb whispered, holding her during a dance in the dim light of the banquet hall. They had a modest but elegant wedding in the winter, with only the closest family. Then Caleb took his wife to the Azure coast, leaving his son in his grandmother's care. Alice couldn't believe her happiness. It was like being in a fairy tale. She cherished her new happiness carefully and didn't go into details, even though her friends, mother, and former colleagues at work asked her about it. Why former colleagues? Caleb helped her find a job at a good private children's clinic, where the conditions were better and the salary higher. At first, he wanted Alice to only take care of the house and herself, but she insisted on her own way. She loved her profession and wasn't going to give it up. In the end, her husband paid for her residency training so she could grow professionally. Alice sold her room in the communal apartment and put the money into a bank account with interest, as her husband advised. And Felix the cat was living wonderfully with Robbie, Max, and their family, who became his true family, a close and happy one. Alice hesitated for a long time to tell Caleb about her first marriage. She felt awkward, hurt, and somehow ashamed. Chance decided everything. One evening, as the couple was driving home, they were listening to the radio. The announcer was reporting news about fraudsters who were caught taking apartments from elderly people in the city. "Just look at that, taking the last thing from the elderly." Alice sighed and, unexpectedly even to herself, added, "I feel so sorry for them. I almost ended up in a similar situation myself." "Someone took your home in court?" A surprised Caleb turned to her. "And you didn't tell me anything?" "Well, it was my ex-husband," Alice said, embarrassed. "There was help. Anyway, he got the apartment all to himself. By law, joint property is divided in half. Very strange. But I wasn't happy in that apartment anyway, so I'm even glad I got rid of it." Alice forced a smile, trying to quickly change the subject. Caleb was silent for a moment, then asked about plans for the weekend. "One less thing to worry about, I guess," he muttered, stroking his mustache. Caleb was always a straightforward and honest person. That's how he conducted business, how he interacted with partners, how he raised his son. And this story from his wife's past, even if it was before he came into her life, made him want to get to the bottom of it. "So, about the weekend," Caleb remembered. "Maybe you could go shopping? Buy yourself something new?" Alice looked at her husband in surprise. Caleb loved her. He was caring and attentive. But for him to suggest shopping himself— "You're up to something." She squinted suspiciously. "I'm up to something," Caleb laughed, deliberately mispronouncing the word. "My clever girl." "Are we going somewhere?" Alice guessed. "Yes," he confirmed. Mike finally proposed to his Olivia. They're having a party in a couple of weeks. We're invited, of course, although I'd much rather just go to a bar with him than pretend to have social graces all evening. "Why didn't we have a party like that?" Alice joked. Caleb looked at her as if she had done something incredible. "Because we're not obsessed with showing off like Mike's fiancée. I bet she'll throw parties for any reason. Bought a new sofa, got to invite guests, got a dog, popped the champagne, hung a painting, launch fireworks." Caleb got carried away. Alice couldn't help but burst out laughing. "What a grump you are," she said, wiping away tears of laughter. "What if you like it?" "Let's hope so," Caleb agreed peaceably. "But in any case, you must be my star at that party. This weekend, I'll ask Leonard to drive you. Take him for the whole day. He'll drive you around the shopping centres and help with the bags." "I guess I'll never get used to this," Alice murmured. "I can't go shopping with you myself, and I don't know anything about it anyway." Caleb gently stroked her hand. "Let my man be with you so I don't worry." All right," Alice agreed. She still felt awkward with so much care and was shy about going into expensive boutiques. But her husband's confidence and support gradually helped her overcome this. Time passed, and the planned evening was getting closer. Caleb always had a lot of work in the warm season. The planting season was starting, and farmers were actively buying agricultural machinery. He tried to be at the factory and in the huge sales pavilion every day. His phone didn't stop ringing. Sometimes he needed to go to the bank, sometimes meet suppliers of assembly machines, sometimes control purchases, sometimes sign papers. In this hustle and bustle, Caleb almost forgot that Alice's birthday was approaching just a day after his cousin's engagement party. He had long decided that his wife needed her own car, as it wasn't always possible to call Leonard. Caleb spent a long time choosing a car model for his wife, comparing and evaluating. Finally, he made up his mind, but still couldn't find the time for the actual purchase. Looking at the calendar and realizing that he risked not making it and completely messing up, he decided to combine tasks. That day, representatives from the development plant were at the factory. By 3 in the afternoon, the filming and interviews were over. Caleb realized there was nothing more to wait for. He could leave. All that remained was to wait patiently and be careful on the road. The car ahead began to overtake a slow-moving truck. Caleb was about to follow it, but something inside stopped him, and it was a good thing. Suddenly, a Kamaz truck flew out towards them. The car swerved sharply, trying to get back into its lane, but clipped the shoulder with one wheel. It spun around and was thrown into the ditch. The truck braked sharply. Caleb also slowed down, simultaneously watching the accident. The car miraculously didn't roll over on the steep slope and left deep ruts from its wheels on the ground, traces of the driver's desperate struggle. Caleb, without a second's delay, rushed to the damaged car. The truck driver followed him. "Are you okay? Is everyone alive?" Caleb looked into the open window. A young man was sitting behind the wheel. He was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white, but fortunately, he was unharmed. Next to him, a young woman was pressing her palm to her face. Blood was oozing through her fingers. "Thank God we're alive," the young man exhaled with difficulty. Although for a moment, it seemed like we weren't. The seatbelt helped. "Nothing broken? Didn't hit your head? I have a first aid kit." Caleb looked around anxiously. "My leg seems broken," the young woman said, tilting her head back. "I hit the dashboard." Having made sure there were no serious injuries, Caleb hurried back to his car for the first aid kit. Meanwhile, the truck driver also approached the car, asked the driver something, and inspected the hood from underneath. While Caleb was helping the passenger clean the abrasions on her cheek, the driver of the damaged car and the elderly truck driver attached a tow rope. "We'll pull your little swallow out now," said the elderly driver, giving a thumbs up as he got into the truck. "Just need a little push. It's turned around quite a bit." A couple of minutes later, Caleb rolled up his shirt sleeves and started pushing the car from behind while the driver gave it gas. Clumps of earth and grass flew from under the rear wheels, staining his jeans and sneakers. With effort, the car turned around and slowly crawled behind its tow vehicle. When it was on the road and the hazard lights were flashing, the elderly driver turned off the engine, detached the rope, and threw it into the truck bed. "All right, drive carefully to the nearest service station. Have them check the struts, brakes, and tires," he instructed the young man, who was thanking him. "Thank you so much." The young man shook the elderly driver's hand. "It's nothing. Any decent person would have done the same," he replied. "Maybe I can give you a ride to the city, if it's on the way," Caleb offered. The young woman, calling out to the young man, whispered something to him. He nodded in agreement. Everyone said goodbye and went to their cars. The friendly rural resident turned off at the next intersection, honking 3 times. Caleb, however, followed the rescued car. They reached the city together, where the couple no longer needed escort or insurance. When Caleb dropped off his passengers and pulled up to the car dealership, it was already around 5 in the evening. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror and chuckled. After working at the factory and the road adventures, he really looked like a country bumpkin. Hair dishevelled from the ditch, jeans and sneakers covered in dirt. But there was no time to change. He quickly tidied himself up with wet wipes and water from a bottle, grabbed his wallet, and headed for the entrance of the car dealership. "Caleb, I've never been to parties like this. I feel a bit out of place," Alice whispered to her husband as soon as they stepped through the villa's threshold. The country villa where the party was held looked like a scene from a foreign film. Light walls, large windows, a well-kept garden with white stone paths, a lit-up pool around which tables with buffet snacks and drinks were arranged. The DJ's equipment was located nearby. The grounds were decorated with twinkling fairy lights and lanterns. Guests had already gathered here and there, standing with champagne glasses, chatting, laughing. The men were in suits or elegant shirts, the ladies in evening dresses and heels. "You look absolutely magnificent. Stop worrying." Caleb squeezed her hand and pointed to their reflection in the window. Looking back at him was a graceful, petite brunette in a fitted white dress with thin straps, her hair in an elegant, slightly messy bun. Her look was completed by bright emerald green pumps and a matching embroidered clutch. Alice smiled gratefully at her husband. Together, they headed towards the pool, where most of the guests were. "You're almost late." Michael smiled warmly, hugging them. "Alice, you look stunning," added his fiancée Olivia, appearing beside him. "You absolutely must give me your stylist's contact information." Their light conversation was interrupted by a guest who approached Michael from behind. The host of the evening turned around, replied something, then turned back to Caleb and Alice. "By the way, I'd like to introduce you to my cousin, who's also my friend from university." Michael gestured to the approaching guests. Alice gasped and instinctively grabbed Caleb's elbow. He flinched and raised his eyebrows in surprise. The greeting caught in his throat. "This is my cousin Caleb. He owns the Russ factory, and his wife Alice," Michael finished. At that moment, Michael's phone rang, and he excused himself and stepped away. Olivia was immediately surrounded by her friends. When Michael returned a minute later, his guests were standing, staring at each other. "Did something happen while I was gone?" he asked. "We, I think, have met," Robert said tensely. He felt Maisie stiffen beside him and the thin glass tremble in her hand. Robert recognized Caleb as the very customer he had contemptuously called a country bumpkin, and could barely recognize his ex-wife in his wife. Maisie pursed her lips. She saw that Alice looked nothing like a poor nurse, and understood that her worst fears had come true. Alice's dress and shoes were clearly more expensive and elegant, and the ring with a large stone on her ring finger spoke for itself. "Met? Excellent. Then you'll have something to talk about. The host is calling me. Have fun and don't hold back." Michael hurried away. "Well, a pleasant evening, isn't it?" Caleb tried to ease the tension. He understood who was before him, but didn't show it. "Simply wonderful," Maisie said through clenched teeth and subtly nudged her husband's wrist. He winced and shifted his weight. The situation was becoming unbearable. To their luck, someone behind them awkwardly bumped a string of lanterns, and it fell onto a table, knocking over a dozen glasses. The sound of breaking glass filled the air. Taking advantage of the commotion, Robert and Maisie quickly retreated to another part of the yard. "If you want to leave, just say so." Caleb gently squeezed Alice's hand. "No," the woman replied. I'm not going to give him a reason to feel like a winner. Caleb kissed his wife's temple and led her to the table with drinks. Throughout the evening, the couples tried to keep their distance from each other and avoid crossing paths during contests or when talking to other guests. The party was loud and fun, with disco, games, and karaoke songs. In the middle of the evening, Michael and Olivia announced that they were inviting all guests to the wedding as well. It's so stuffy. Alice sat down on the edge of a small fountain in the garden. I didn't expect such beautiful shoes to rub so much. It hurts. Caleb sat down beside her and helped her take off her shoe. Yes, that's a nasty blister. Okay, I'll find a plaster now and bring some iced water, and you stay here for a bit. I'm not going anywhere with one shoe on anyway. Alice smiled and shrugged. The tension after meeting her ex had almost dissipated. The woman relaxed, dipping her hand into the fountain basin. Midnight was approaching, and the party was supposed to end with fireworks soon. Decided to take a break? Robert approached the fountain. Let's say, Alice replied warily. What do you want? I thought neither of us was eager to talk to the other. Everything inside tightened with unpleasant memories, but she quickly composed herself, forcing them away. Come on, Allie. Robert, with a drunken, sickly sweet smile, came too close. Now we're birds of a feather. What's with these grudges? I doubt your wife would approve of that thought. Alice nodded towards the guests. And I'm not going to ask her. I decide for myself. Robert arrogantly tilted his chin up. Alice watched him silently, only following him with her eyes. Suddenly, she felt both disgusted and amused. Could she have ever loved this smug type, for whom she had cried all night after he left her? Listen, let's forget all the bad stuff. Robert came so close that Alice felt physically uncomfortable, and she instinctively moved away. Fortunately, Caleb was already hurrying towards them along the path. What grudges are you talking about? He stood between them, protecting Alice. Perhaps about how you bribed the judge to take the apartment from your wife a year ago. Robert recoiled and froze, as if hit by a dusty sack. Caleb handed Alice the glass of iced water and continued. Or perhaps about the fact that you and your employees wouldn't hurt to learn the basics of sales ethics? About how you should talk to clients who don't fit your idea of wealth? So what exactly were the grudges you wanted to discuss with my wife? I need to go. Excuse me, Robert mumbled. Alcohol had turned him from an arrogant type into a pathetic sight. The former director, stumbling, hastily retreated. What a pathetic type. Caleb sighed heavily. You should have gotten your rightful share of the apartment back. I have an excellent lawyer. He would have simply destroyed someone like that. Caleb, it's not worth it. Alice placed her hand on his forearm. I don't want to go back to that swamp. Let him choke on that apartment. He'll get what's coming to him. But how did you find out everything? Caleb sat down beside her, gently adjusting a few strands of hair that had come loose from her bun. I told you I have a lawyer friend. He smiled mysteriously. I used my connections, talked to the right people, looked at the case files. They showed me photos. Ah, I see, the woman drawled, glancing sideways. And what's this story about cars and ethics? Oh, nothing. I was looking for a birthday present for you, Caleb confessed. A present? At a car dealership? Wait, you don't mean… Alice looked at him, stunned, grasping the implication. Everything tomorrow, tomorrow, Caleb laughed, pulling her close. Leave me at least a little intrigue for the surprise. Explosions sounded above them, and the sky bloomed with bright red and yellow lights. Alice watched the fireworks, and it seemed to her that they were shining only for her today. As if in those bright flashes, her old self had burned away, frightened, insecure, dependent on the opinion of a man who had never loved her. Soon, Alice and Caleb also said goodbye to Michael and his fiancée, thanking them for the warm reception. Her foot still ached from the uncomfortable shoes. Even the miraculously found plaster didn't help. It's still hard to walk, Alice sighed, leaning on her husband. It's okay, the car isn't far. And there, I'll carry you in my arms if you want. Caleb smiled. Somewhere in the crowd, Maisie's displeased face flashed, and next to it, Robert's drawn face. But Alice was indifferent to them. Caleb carefully opened the car door and gently helped Alice into the passenger seat. I feel a bit faint, she whispered. Don't be silly, Caleb suddenly said. Alice, why are you looking like that? My dear, you're nauseous. You've only been drinking champagne for the past 2 weeks. Coffee makes you sick, which is good, by the way. He smiled and continued listing. It seems you've given yourself the biggest present for tomorrow. Alice looked at him in disbelief, then at her hands, and at her reflection in the rearview mirror. How could I not notice? She murmured, and suddenly understood everything. Caleb immediately hugged his wife tightly, stroking her hair. Let's go home, my happiness, he said softly. The night city drifted past the car window, somewhere already quiet and sleeping, somewhere still full of lights and noise. Alice dozed off, leaning against her husband's shoulder, and even in her sleep, a happy smile played on her lips. Tomorrow will be a beautiful day, and the day after tomorrow, and every new dawn will be like this, when dreams come true, and next to you is a loved and loving person.